on the Provincial Environment Group section of the Scottish Episcopal Church website after we end this session at 12:30. The document being launched today is the result of the work of many people. The Church and Society Committee, the Provincial Environment Group, of course, and Robert Woodford in particular, our consultant, who has drafted the document we're going to be talking about. I'm very thankful for the work that's gone into this and the people who've given so much time and expertise. Today's launch is the start of a consultation period with you and with as many other people in the Scottish Episcopal Church as possible. It is quite a short period from now until the early summer, because its purpose is to inform discussion and decision in our diocesan synods and general synod. That's when a final version of the action plan will be adopted for the whole church to guide the province, diocese, and charges as we take the actions needed if we are to realise the ambition of General Synod to achieve net zero as a church by the year 2030, just 7 years away. That decision and our commitment to fulfil it is part of our response, I think, to the Anglican Communion's 5 marks of mission, and in particular the 5th mark, which you might be familiar with, to strive the safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. The action plan being launched today seeks to build on this by placing 3 fundamental Christian values at the heart of the actions we will take and the work we will do. They are discipleship, justice, and hope. And there is a full discussion of those values in the document. These values underpin all that we do as a church. And as we move forward together towards net zero in 2030, they will sustain the work we need to do together. The Net Zero Action Plan being launched today for consultation with you and all members of our church takes these principles and our ambition and suggests the practical steps we will need to take to fulfill them. Agreeing principles or agreeing an ambition, even such a challenging one, is relatively easy, but it is much more difficult to agree the means and the method of achieving it. We know that the climate emergency is not something in the future, but is a present reality, already impacting our planet and the lives of many millions of people. We do not have time to waste. But we've learned that we can make a difference and give a lead to others if we act together. The Net Zero Action Plan is being launched today to enable us to do just that, to work together for the sake of the earth, all life, and all people. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Robert Woodford, the consultant working with the Provincial Environment Group, who has drafted today's plan and is going to present it to you now.
Thank you, Bishop Ian, and thank you all for turning up this morning. It's really nice to see so many people and very many familiar faces as well. So let me just share my screen. I've got some slides for you that will be the basis of the presentation that I share with you. So this is the Net Zero Action Plan launch. And a quick agenda for what I have for you today is I'm going to go over the 10 strategic principles that outline the Net Zero Action Plan, go over our proposed definition of the Net Zero 2030 target, give you an overview of the 10 core objectives of the plan, as well as our focus for the 2023 to 2030 period. And then I'm going to describe, or I'm actually just going to show one slide that shows the 50 enabling interventions that all of the provincial committees and dioceses need to come together to agree upon in order to empower charges to take the steps necessary to get to net zero in time. And then I'll give you an overview of the consultation process as well as then start a question and answer session. So this is the Net Zero Action Plan, and its subtitle is Empowering Implementation, and you'll hear that word empowering a lot. This is all about trying to enable charges to take all of those steps that are needed to get to net zero. I should probably first start by saying what this is not. So this is not something, if you're just starting out on the net zero journey and trying to get a step-by-step guide on how to get started on that. If you want to do that, the right document for that is the Net Zero Toolkit, which was released last year from the Provincial Environment Group, building on the great work of the Church and Society Committee. And you can find that on the Scottish Episcopal website in the Provincial Environment Group area. So just to be clear, there's a lot in this Net Zero Action Plan. And if you want a step-by-step guide of what we've got ready for you today, the Net Zero Toolkit is the place to go. The purpose of this document is really to bring the church together and to collectively chart a new course towards what we're calling a flourishing future for the church. And in many ways, it's really an internal strategy document to try and align all of the different stakeholders from across the Scottish Episcopal Church on this shared pathway forwards. And it's a plan that enables the church to hold each other to account. We want to hold ourselves to account with various targets and goals that have been outlined in this plan. And we recognize that this is an approach that is really a step change from the way things have been done previously, but we believe a step change is the very thing that is needed. And we hope that we have constructed this in a way that really empowers and not controls, and it's certainly offered with that intent. And as I said before, it's really that word empowerment that you will read in the action plan time and time again. This is all about empowering charges to implement net zero by 2030. And the whole work stream and purpose of the action plan is to bring the whole church together in this endeavour, whether that be through financial support, through the selection of appropriate solutions, the provision of resources, the availability of tools, new net zero workshops that we're working on, short webinars, easy to use templates or technical expertise. These are all of the things that we believe will help charges and help you move towards net zero. And we want to provide you with everything you need in order to get the job done. And I suppose it's also the purpose of it is really to respond in a very comprehensive way to the call of the General Synod motions, both in 2020 and 2021. And I'm just going to recall that motion here for you, just so you have it on the screen. This was the motion from 2020, and that was that this synod, expressing the need for urgent action in relation to the global climate emergency, call on the Church and Society Committee, working in conjunction with other appropriate bodies, to bring forward a programme of actions to General Synod by 2021 to resource the Scottish Episcopal Church in working towards achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2030. And of course, since then, we of course moved to the formation of the Provincial Environment Group, and also had subsequent motions in 2021. So the motion of 2020 set the target of net zero by 2030. And last year at General Synod, we did a presentation that went over how we define a credible definition of what net zero 2030 means. That's predominantly on the scope of activities and the boundaries. And just as a short recap, I'm going to explain that for you once more here. So we use the categorization of emissions, so that's carbon emissions, in 3 different areas, and that's supported by the protocol that's developed by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, an independent standards body. And it divides the category of activities into 3 different scopes, scopes 1, scopes 2, and scopes 3. So on scopes 1, scope 1 carbon emissions are associated with all on-site gas and boiler emissions, as well as work-related travel in transport that is owned and controlled by the Scottish Episcopal Church. Scope 2 are indirect emissions associated with basically purchased electricity, heat, or steam. In the majority of cases, this is going to be the incoming power to churches and halls supplied by the national grid. So that's scope 2 emissions. And then scope 3 emissions are all other indirect emissions. And that typically, if you're in an organization, would be everything in your supply chain. So everything that comes in as far as materials and everything that goes out. In the case of the Scottish Episcopal Church, actually, this is quite minimal. It would be things like paper, perhaps, or wine and wafers, and maybe service sheets that people take away. So as far as the definition for net zero 2030, we intend to include both scope 1 emissions and scope 2 emissions, as well as clergy and staff reimbursable travel from scope 3. And we believe that this encompasses the material emissions of the Scottish Episcopal Church and is a good target and definition for our 2030 goal ahead. Moving on to the boundary of where we set the organisation of the Scottish Episcopal Church, we are defining that as all those entities that are within the sphere of the Scottish Episcopal Church that are under our control or significantly under our influence. And that will be mainly cathedrals, churches, church halls and auxiliary buildings, as well as clergy housing, bishop housing, staff accommodation owned by the church, the offices, as well as the Scottish Episcopal Church. So that's what we include inside the boundary of our net zero 2030 definition. And then on the outside, we have all of the other things that may be associated with mainly scope 3 emissions. So that's our intent. That's a quick recap. We intend to set the scopes of activity mainly to be scopes 1 and 2, and the organizational boundary as set below on the screen here. And we believe that this really provides a balance between the prophetic call as well as the practical reality of trying to get this done in time by 2030. So the target date has been set by General Synod in 2020, and we've given an overview of the credible definition of the scopes of inclusion as well as the boundary. So next, this is what Bishop Ian was talking about before, the 3 underlining principles that we use in order to view the work that we have ahead of us. So this is primarily the lens through which we interpret the goal towards net zero 2030, and of course embracing the 5th mark of mission. And those principles, as Bishop Ian said, are discipleship, justice and hope, and they inform everything that we do. Moving on to that, through that lens, we come up with 10 objectives of the net zero action plan. I'm going to get onto those in just a second. But those 10 objectives actually fit very seamlessly in with the 10 points of the net zero action plan, net zero toolkit. So the action plan and the toolkit sit side by side. So if you're looking at number 3 in the action plan, that will correspond with number 3 in the toolkit. And we hope this provides an easy to understand way and seamless way to go between the action plan and the toolkit in the months and years ahead. So let's move on to the 10 strategic principles that underpin the net zero action plan. The first is that we believe we have a moral imperative to act. Climate justice is in our hearts and our minds in everything that we do. And in everything we do, we are acknowledging the devastating consequences that climate change is having on our brothers and sisters across the world. And we also acknowledge that every fraction of a degree matters, and every ton of carbon dioxide release matters. And we acknowledge the urgency of the task that we are called to do here. The second principle is that our approach must be ecologically sound. And it's based on this, we're actually looking to reduce our absolute emissions reductions by 90% based on our 2018 baseline. Being ecologically sound also requires us to acknowledge that climate change and biodiversity loss are intertwined, that they are part and parcel of 2 crises that are interdependent, and we need to both address those things in tandem as well as address the root causes of those. Thirdly, that our solutions will be technically realistic. So we're looking at solutions and we were proposing solutions that are mature, readily available based on resilient technology that is tested at scale. Predominantly what we mean by this is heat pumps for space heating, so that's heating the spaces of the church, or radiant heating solutions for those churches that have decided upon a heat the people strategy. And the choice of those 2 decisions between whether to heat the space or heat the people will often be determined by the amount of utilization that building gets. There are many other factors, and we'll outline those for you. The 4th principle is that we need to be financially prudent. And actually, we believe through implementing this plan, there are substantially lower charge operational costs. Indeed, we estimate at the moment, although there's some modeling to continue on this, that actually over the next 8 years, we would save over £2 million in operational cost savings for charges. Also part of this plan, we would unlock up to 27 million in grant funding. There is a substantial amount of money of grant funding that is available by the government, and I'll come on to some of those things. And then thirdly, on being financially prudent, we will be reducing carbon offset charges in 2030. Every ton of CO2 that we stop emitting now will be less carbon offset charges for the church to have to deal with when it comes to 2030. So we want to reach net zero by 2030, but enable the church to be in a better position financially over the long term as a result of this process. Fifthly, we recognise the importance of protecting the heritage of our buildings. We acknowledge that good upkeep and maintenance of the church buildings is a prerequisite for this work. You know, we have really beautiful buildings and we want to protect them as best that we can. And as part of this, we're going to form a new partnership with the Historic Environment Scotland to enable to bring their heritage expertise for those charges with listed buildings. Sixth, this action plan is a results-driven strategy. We want to hold ourselves to account, and we will be providing standing committee, indeed it's in the document itself, a number of key performance indicators that they can use in order to track and progress this action plan as it gets resourced and financed in the years ahead. And it's also a plan that is focused. Our focus in the immediate term is on cathedrals as well as the top 25% of energy consuming charges, because this is where we feel we will get the largest front-loaded carbon emission reductions. That's our priority, and then we'll come on to those other churches after that. Sixth, we take a systems approach or a systems perspective to the church. You will have all seen the organizational chart that has the General Synod, the Standing Committee, the various boards, and then all of the committees. Now that's good from a decision-making point of view, but it doesn't actually show the flows of data and policies and how they get enacted. We've done some analysis that looks at the ways of flows of data between various committees and charges and dioceses, and we're looking to do specific intervention points on those flows of data. Indeed, we've identified over 50 of those intervention points in order to shift the whole system of the Scottish Episcopal Church towards net zero. Eighth, that we're looking for having cross-committee collaboration. So we are seeking, as the Provincial Environment Group, or the Provincial Environment Group is seeking synergistic relationships with the other committees, and to have those other committees as guiding partners for some of the 10 objectives. So we're looking for a collaborative approach to the whole plan, and we hope that comes across both in the meetings that we've already had with those committees, as well as what we've suggested in the plan itself. Ninth, that we want an ecosystem of partnerships. That's all very well having our own internal collaboration. We want to also be part of a wider voice for change nationally and internationally. So we will strengthen our partnerships with the Church of Scotland, Eco Congregation Scotland, Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, as well as develop new partnerships such as with Keep Scotland Beautiful in our climate literacy rollout. And then 10th, or the 10th principle, is being carbon credible. I think we've given a clear definition, and you'll see that in the action plan. We have a clear target, and we have a clear plan to address the material emissions of the church. And our whole approach aligns with international standards. Those are standards based on the UN as well as bodies such as the Science Based Targets Initiative. So they are the 10 strategic principles that have guided the Net Zero Action Plan. Moving ahead, let's look at the 10 core objectives of the action plan itself, which I suppose you could say form the body of the whole plan. Those are as follows. The first is a focus on energy efficiency excellence. And this is really all about creating a competence across the church to enable it to achieve that goal. And it ensures that charges have everything they need to be able to install effective and appropriate insulation in their buildings. So this is all about increasing energy efficiency, reducing heat loss, whilst protecting the heritage of our buildings. And we've also set a plan of action to address the poor energy efficiency of our rectories, trying to get those homes to a minimum of EPC rating of C as soon as possible, which will increase clergy well-being and reduce the final financial burden that this carries for clergy and their families. So that's energy efficiency. The second is 100% clean energy. This is our second objective, to move the energy systems of the church buildings and halls across to 100% clean energy by 2030. And there are a couple of ways to do this. One is a switch to 100% renewable electricity tariffs. If you're here today and you don't have a 100% renewable electricity tariff, move it over now. From our analysis that we did last year with the Energy Footprint Analyzer, only 18% of charges have renewable electricity tariffs. This is a really good way to to up the amount of renewable energy that's used as part of it. So that's one area of clean energy. The second is the installation of new zero direct emission heating solutions to replace existing heating systems in churches. And, I won't lie, this is, of course, the most difficult and challenging task that the church has before it. But we do believe that this is achievable with the right decisions made in terms of space heating, which, as I said before, is most likely via highly efficient heat pumps, or a heat the people strategy, either using radiant or pew-based heating strategies. And again, that will depend upon the type of utilization pattern that the buildings have. In addition to those two fundamental shifts, so that's 100% renewable energy tariffs and moving across to zero direct heating emission solutions, we also think there's scope to generate significant amounts of energy from on-site solar and PV. And of course, this will help chargers reduce their electricity costs, generate revenue income, and help reduce future offset charges across the province. So that's the objective for 100% clean energy. Our next objective, they're the two biggest ones. So don't worry, they're not all going to be as complicated as that. The third one is thriving biodiversity. And this is really a goal to increase the richness of biodiversity in our church lands and encourage it to be a place of refuge for nature to thrive. And this is really acknowledging that fundamental principle that I said before, this interconnected nature of climate change and biodiversity loss, and seeking to play our part in healing creation as a part of that. Fourth, active transport. And this is really premised on the need to reduce work-related travel by clergy and fossil fuel transport in order to address the emissions that are included within our net zero 2030 target. And to do this, we've aligned with our approach with the Scottish Government's active travel framework, which supports our goals in a holistic and a comprehensive manner. And actually, if you look into it in detail, it really embeds a climate justice approach in really a tacit way within it. So we're embracing active travel as part of our plan. The fifth principle is to have zero waste. And this is more preparing for the future post 2030, when we will move towards including all scope 3 emissions. We need to set a target for that, but it's not within our 2030 target definition. However, we do want to empower chargers to take the initial steps in preparation for that. Our firm belief is that we need to move away from the use of products and services that are based on a linear model of production to one that is primarily based on a circular economy. And as the years go on, we hope that the choices that you will have in the selection of those products and services will ease. On the sixth is really to ensure good governance across the whole church. So within the action plan, we provide guidance to help create, really, I suppose you could call it the enabling conditions that will allow the net zero action plan to flourish in a way that is both credible and robust. So this is really about ensuring that the necessary oversights are in place at both at both the province and diocesan level, as well as at charge levels, to put in place and really track all of the various elements of the plan. And I think it is fair to say that without that oversight and without the active management of the agreed objectives in this plan, both by the provincial and diocesan standing committees, we do not think that this net zero action plan will be effective. So good governance is central to ensure that this is a success. Seventh, our objective here is really to create a carbon literate organisation. So we want the Scottish Episcopal Church to become a climate literate organisation. And to do this, we intend to roll out a carbon literacy programme that's been created with Carbon Literacy Trust in partnership with Keep Scotland Beautiful, to put it in the Scottish context. And we also plan to launch a set of new net zero workshops in collaboration with a partner organisation, Heat Hack, which is a really exciting programme that will help delve into all the decisions that churches need to make on their net zero journey, including decisions, things like whether to go with space heating or radiant heating. So that's climate literacy. The eighth objective is rooted worship. And this is really to ensure that our liturgy, rituals, and forms of worship amplify the fifth Marker mission, to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. And I'll let you read about that particular objective in the consultation document. The ninth is positive finances. Our objective here is really to support chargers with all of the financial resources that are needed to make the transition to net zero. And this will come primarily through maximising the significant funding that is available from the Scottish Government. You may not be aware that there's up to 80 to 90,000 available for heat pumps right now, as well as £20,000 for energy efficiency measures for every single charge that's available now. And we're also recommending that there's an expansion to the Provisional Buildings Grant Fund and Buildings Loan Fund in order to support the match funding that's associated with that. Positive finances are also about ensuring that when large financial decisions are taken, that these decisions are holistic in their nature and consider the full gamut of factors, including climate justice. And what we're really meaning here is that we need to bring the voice of those on the receiving end of climate change in everything that we do, particularly when you're thinking about replacing a gas boiler, for example. And then finally, we want to build a movement. So all of the objectives 1 to 9 have been more inward looking. So they're the internal actions that the church can take. But we recognize that there's also a need to look outward and join hands in partnership with others. So our intent with this objective is therefore to build a movement of change with other organizations, playing our role as an important node in the ecosystem of change makers across Scotland. So that's the 10 objectives. You can read about all of them in the Net Zero Action Plan. And each one of those objectives has a set of key results. So they're particular metrics that we want to achieve by 2030 and in interim targets in between. And many of these objectives actually come before 2030 in order to get the momentum going before that. And as part of the consultation, we really would like your feedback on those key results as part of the consultation. So clearly, there's a lot in what I've just shown you, and we need to really focus our energies and our financial investments and our resources in some key areas. And what drives that is the focus area of the 2030 net zero definition. So that's the boundary that we've set and the scopes 1 and 2 of emissions. So based on that, we think that the primary source of focus for the whole church should be on effective governance with the associated tools with that, along with energy efficiency and clean energy. This will be supported through climate literacy program and to a certain extent, a smaller portion of active travel. But I want the clear message from this launch, and I hope it comes across in the action plan itself, that the focus should be on achieving energy efficiency excellence, as well as the conversion across to 100% clean energy. And that's because it will have the biggest impact on our overall emissions. And it is through those two activities that we will reduce our emissions in absolute terms. In order to do that, this is the bit where I show you the 50 enabling interventions, and it might be a bit overwhelming, so just prepare yourselves for it. But the 50 interventions are here, and these are all the things that Provincial Environment Group are working on with various committees and boards to help provide a core set of resources. And it's all of these types of things that will be linked into the Net Zero Toolkit itself. So the task of this isn't a task for a charge. This is the task for the church, for the province and for dioceses, for boards and for committees to come together to agree upon these intervention points and to come together so that we have aligned them on an agreed approach moving forwards. And a lot of this work will be carried out by the new Net Zero Delivery Director that has been approved by Standing Committee and that for recruitment, which is imminent. And we've also made a proposal to have a new Net Zero Delivery Manager in every diocese. And we are seeking, we have recommended to Standing Committee that they put a 50% contribution using their reserves towards the employment of those people. So I hope all of this has whetted your appetite for more. I hope it hasn't scared you. And of course, we can go into more detail about some of these enabling interventions during the webinars that will follow. So let me just quickly give you a couple of slides on the consultation process itself. So how do you get involved? Well, one, go and read the consultation document that's available now on the Scottish Episcopal website. So it's quite a meaty document. So make sure you've got a nice cup of coffee or hot herbal tea or whatever you have, and sit down. You're going to need about 90 minutes, potentially 2 hours to read it at a steady pace. So I just want to warn you in advance, it's not, you can read the executive summary, that will take you about 5 minutes, and hopefully it will give you a flavor of what we're doing. And I think that would be helpful, and you can provide some feedback based on that. But it is quite a meaty document, and I think that reflects the scale of the task that we have ahead of us. And then second, once you've read the consultation document, register for an online webinar, or register for an online webinar and then read the document, but come to the webinars with your questions of what you've seen in the webinars, and hopefully more explanation will be done. We're running 2 webinars, one on the 21st of February and one on the 9th of March. And then, you know, we will receive obviously some informal feedback about that you know, during those webinars, but the formal way in which everyone should respond to the consultation process is via the online consultation survey, which closes on Tuesday, March the 28th. That's in 6 weeks' time today. So you have 6 weeks to get through all of this and process it and give some feedback as to what you feel needs to happen and the way in which we will shape it moving forward. And you can find the online consultation survey link again on the same page that you find the consultation document, which is available from the PEG website. Once we've done that, we'll review all of the responses, collate them together as part of my task ahead, and actually present all of those recommendations to the Provincial Environment Group that will then make changes and adaptations, and we'll look to present those to the Standing Committee in April. And then we will make the final adaptations to that with our goal to include the Net Zero Action Plan in papers for General Synod of this year for motion approval. Just to give you a heads up, members of the Provincial Environment Group will be giving presentations at every diocesan synod. It will be about a 20 to 30 minute presentation. So hopefully we'll see some of you at those synods, at those diocesan synods. And that's a kind of timeline of the events. And here are the people that will be coming to each one of those synods. So thank you so much for listening. I know I've gone on quite a lot for the last, I don't know how long it's been, 20 minutes, I hope. There's a lot in there, and I'd like to pass back to Bishop Ian. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat, and then both Bishop Ian and myself will answer them after Bishop has concluded. Bishop Ian.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Robert. Thank you. Well, as you said, that's an awful lot for people to take in a short time. The good thing is that, of course, this session, the presentation, will be available for you to watch again and again, and for others to watch via the Episcopal Church website. So please do use the recording. You might want to use it alongside your reading of the document to illuminate using Robert's insights and guidance. That brings us to realizing that we've got to a very important moment in our journey towards net zero, which is the launch of this document. As Robert said, the intention is to empower people in the church, charges and vestries and dioceses and the province, to give people resources so that they can take decisions and take actions themselves. We've got the 3 values, we've got the 10 principles, we've got the 50 intervention points. All of it's designed to provide empowerment. We have a clear definition we're hoping the church will agree on about what we mean by net zero. We are moving towards appointments of people who will, as Robert is doing as a consultant, but who will be available to guide the province and the diocese through the next 7 years, providing us resource and leadership and encouragement. And this is for every part of the church. So if you're on the committee or you're on a board and there are people there who've not seen this presentation, please make sure they don't just see the document, but they also perhaps view the presentation, the recording. If you're on the vestry, could you do the same? If you're in a congregation, encourage people to watch this presentation and to read the document and provide the feedback, as Robert has indicated. All of this is to enable us to move towards the flourishing future we know that God is offering us through creation and through our ability to be renewed ourselves as part of creation. And I hope that you'll find the document will stimulate you, will encourage you as you address that. Now we have time for you to ask questions, and Donald has reminded us in the chat to submit those questions through the chat, and Donald himself will moderate that and will present us with